Erika Grey, and this is the Twist News. And today I am delighted to have Mike Jones, who is a Russian correspondent and expert. And we're going to have some very interesting discussion. Mike, you made the kill list. You made the hit list. Congratulations.
I did. Thank you very much indeed. I've joined the wall of honor, I guess, for journalists. So, although as much as we joke about it, it's a very macabre and sorry state of affairs that it even exists, especially given as some of those listed beside me, one of them in particular, Faina, is just a teenage girl who wrote a blog about her daily life in Donbass. So yeah, for us journalists, we view it with a wry smile. But sadly, it is something that is symbolic of the persecution of the people of Donbass.
Well, the other thing, too, is it originates in Langley, Virginia. It's a CIA list. And
Proudly
that's
stated on its front page alongside the victims' bodies that are also displayed there. I don't advise those who are of a nervous disposition to view that disgusting website.
a teenage girl is actually on that list.
Among many, many others, yes.
Which
Yeah.
brings us into our next topic, comparing Russian soldiers to ISIS, which, by the way, was predictable. It was predictable that the media would then put that out there. So I'd like you to talk about some of the atrocities on the part of Zelensky.
Oh, well, I need only reference a news article that came out the other day. I'm not sure how widely spread it was in the Western media. I believe in France it was reported, where they arrested and detained two mercenaries affiliated with, we say, these neo-Nazis, who proudly on their own Telegram channels displayed not just their affiliations to former organizations of the Third Reich, but also their crimes. One of them even confessed to the execution of a Russian prisoner of war, given the fact that he was pictured in this photograph with the victim in front of him. This, as I say, was picked up by Russian media. It's just another story of another instance of this behavior. That being said, I am aware of allegations, quite whether they were true, because an internal investigation was launched in Russia to investigate a video where it was claimed that a Russian outfit had been guilty of, let's say, ISIS-style tactics. However, upon scrutiny, it's very difficult because, uniforms don't match. And we've had, in this information war, we've had fakes, we've had stagings, we've had provocations. So unfortunately, yeah, it's very difficult to verify, but it doesn't surprise, therefore, that this would appear, and therefore such allegations would be made. My personal point of view is, well, it takes one to know one, because did the CIA not fund ISIS? Have they not schooled and tutored the Ukrainians on how to use human shields in these tactics of fighting in built-up areas, of purposely placing tanks next to kindergartens and so on and so forth? So unfortunately, there I have to take, I have to sort of smile at that sort of pot kettle black kind of feeling allegation. I personally haven't heard any testimonies when I've been to Donbass, to the front lines there, or the civilians I've spoken to, of anything like this behavior from the Russian soldiers. Now, people would say, well, you're not going to, from the people in that area. So, I accept that. That's fine. I personally haven't found any concrete evidence to support such claims, just like I'm really genuinely struggling to find any even details regarding this allegation of Russia kidnapping children. I personally want to find these alleged camps. I want to visit them. I have that ability and I have the connections to arrange it. But when I go through the Western media and articles, these sorts of important details are often seemingly omitted from the articles that I've personally read.
I'm glad you brought up the topic of the children, because yes, I saw that in the media, and that would have been another question. What I find interesting is that when I tune into the Russian media, I hear facts. When I tune into Sergey Lavrov, who, by the way, I greatly admire, he is a first-rate diplomat, probably one of the best in the world. And he is a walking encyclopedia. All that man does is recite facts. And yet he is so disrespected by American politicians. The media completely just crushes him. And it's really tragic that Russia's voice is not being heard. And I want to ask you about something. The U.S. State Department right now has a code red for travel to Russia, advising all Americans to stay out, talking about all of these kidnappings and various arrests. And I wonder if maybe they don't want Americans going there because Americans might find out the truth that Russians really love Russia, that they like their president, and that it's not the picture that's being portrayed. So I'd like your commentary on the US State Department's code red for Americans. Now, having said that, I'm just going to quickly say, Evan, I did a piece on Evan, was obviously a US propagandist. He had to have a hole in his head to step foot when there's a proxy war going on right now, and he's touting US propaganda. So I just want to just make that comment.
Yeah, I agree with your theory, let's say, that they'd like to minimize the interaction between the American people and certainly the Russian people in Russia. Every American I've come across, one very recently, he's now researching, and I'm trying to assist with my partnership with immigration lawyers, how he can move from the United States to Russia. He was that impressed. There are numerous, I'd say Americans are actually some of the most common expats that I run into. French being another, and British surprisingly pop up. It used to be Germans, but from what I understand in Moscow, many of the Germans have actually left and gone back, mainly out of fear of their own government's actions. We've seen it with Alina Lip, whose bank accounts were frozen by the German government, and also that of her mother for her association with her. So I wouldn't dispute your sort of idea there that that's the intention behind it. The justifications given are often quite farcical. You mentioned that Sergey Lavrov, such an eloquent and use an encyclopedia of man, a dying breed, alas. I've not seen anyone comparable in the West. I have seen a similar caliber statesman from China in their reciting of facts, recording things, which makes it ever so difficult for the Western media to disprove or dispute what they say. So what I've seen in the Western media is either a complete ignoring of their words, or twisting, or infantile, childish playground tactics to either
like
smear or besmirch them.
Childish play. Sorry, it
It is,
just
and
lost it
then
for a second. That was
yeah,
so
we
funny.
have the, like, almost the children, Annalena Baerbock from Germany, going to Beijing and lecturing them on things she has no right to be talking to them about, expelling Russian diplomats in Germany. I believe she was behind that now, really stirring the pot. But coming out, this is the woman that said that, what was it, the 360-degree comment, that Russia's policy had gone 360 degrees. It's literally nonsensical sometimes, these words that come out of these Western, usually quite highly placed individuals. Ursula von der Leyen, trying to claim that Su-27s are run on washing machine chips. And then I feel bad for the likes of Sergey Lavrov, who keep a straight face and still attend. I don't recall Sergey Lavrov ever storming out in a hissy fit, throwing his toys out of the pram, when he rarely loses his cool, despite, as you've just said, the not just like disrespect, but often insulting behavior he's subjected to.
He doesn't deserve it. He absolutely doesn't deserve it. And Russia doesn't deserve what's happening to Russia right now. Russia has a legitimate argument, a legitimate beef, drew a line in the sand. Missiles would be facing right from its backyard. And I think what's tragic is nobody's listening to the facts, and the propaganda is so strong in the US media. It's about four terms: territorial integrity of Ukraine, which who knows what that means.
Well, that's what I was accused of violating, and ended up on the hit list.
I've said it on shows. I have territorial integrity.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
Russia
you guys
aggression.
lost your one voice, Tucker Carlson, who was not just himself saying things, but giving others the platform and the space to present, their arguments, their views, and often or not, it wasn't aligning with the U.S. government.
Well, he cost the network a huge, huge lawsuit. And I think that's why Murdoch let him go. I think Murdoch was steaming over the amount of money now that has to be paid out because of his statements. But Tucker Carlson, I believe we're going to see him elsewhere. He's going to be
Yeah,
picked up.
I have no doubt. I think he has the means and the power and the will, and perhaps we shall see if he has the will, but he could create his own platform and be very successful. I think Fox News did him a massive favor at just the right time, the peak of interest in what he has to say, and the sort of, as I say, the voice that he gave, not just himself, but others. I think that he featured there, that the Americans, it was refreshing for them to hear.
Yes, and I think also it was great that he wasn't afraid to take that stand, because
He even went way
it's not
further than I
popular.
ever thought he would, going into JFK and this sort of territory. I thought, oh, Tucker, you're skating on thin ice here.
Oh, I've had people tell me, you're trying to build a channel, don't mention Russia. You're sounding too favorable to Russia. Well, the reason I'm favorable is I'm very analytical, and I've been following I'm older, so I've been following things for some time. And I think that's what comes with being an older journalist, is you have that history of following things. And I saw the Russian argument, and I saw that it was very legitimate. And I saw the antics that were being done on the part of the United States. And also, the Maidan rallies are funded by George Soros. I understand this whole power thing going on in the European Union. And, Europe, one of the pieces of Emmanuel Macron's speech that most journalists didn't pick up was this reciprocity and mirror clause, so that in trade agreements now, you're going to have to adopt EU law. How democratic is that?
Yeah, it's becoming ever more apparent. And I think lately, it's funny what will just tip people over the edge, but the more dystopian and fascist the Ukraine becomes, and the more brazen they appear to be, this war on God, as I've called it in Ukraine, of arresting priests, torturing them, calling them Russian assets or things like this for simply not switching over to the Ukrainian version of the Orthodox Church, trying to terminate leases on cathedrals. These are the things that people are waking up to, and they're saying, oh, wait a minute, these are not Western values. You're not defending democracy. Okay, and then the lie unravels and they go back. There seem to be certain trigger points, and people like Tucker Carlson, I think their thorn in the side was they were presenting those little things that were just planting those seeds, and people were waking up. And remember, we've just come out of the pandemic as well, so other truths are now coming out, and other evidence and facts that are also pointing back towards the legacy media that sold lies to the American people. And this is where I see we're beginning of the end of these. Oh, I hope the beginning of the end of these fake news outlets, and we're moving into, even Elon Musk said it, the citizen journalist. And I think that's an exciting time if it can actually come about, and platforms can be built to successfully distribute the work of some amazing individuals, some of them on Miratorics.
I know exactly what you're saying. The media is so strong. I was at my spa, and the ladies there were talking about the Russian operation, but you have to hear they're literally, Putin is a monster. Look at the images, and it's very effective. The propaganda is very effective. And if you really put Putin next to Zelensky, who looks calm? Putin. Who looks sophisticated? Putin. Who looks lecherous? Zelensky. He's actually changed. His features have changed during the course of this. He looks lecherous. You could just see it in his facial features. And yet the media, the US media, is so strong with just presenting images in one narrative that people really believe Vladimir Putin is a monster. I don't believe Putin is a monster. I think he's probably one of the best leaders that Russia's ever had. He's
It has been,
absolutely
but of
brilliant
course he's
and
no angel
sophisticated.
either. I don't think anyone anywhere, not even in Russia, would tell you that Vladimir Putin is an angel.
But to call
However,
him a monster, though, a
yeah,
monster, a
and to
human monster,
call him
right?
half the
We
things they've done is quite often just projection, usually of the leaders that insult another world leader like that. And again, another example of just it's quite embarrassing. I found it, and it's been going back
Mhm.
years how the BBC would insult President Putin almost needlessly, sometimes just to have a jab at someone, which is first sort of made me suspicious at that actually we weren't being told the full story. We're seeing the same methods now being employed with China. Quite why? I don't know. These leaders seem to be going down this path to hell, and they want to drag us all with them. And I hope that changes and people stand up. And I'm very encouraged to hear that Robert Kennedy Jr. is looking to run against Biden in 2024. That kind of gives me hope in some regards. Certainly, he's got a lot more intellect and certainly more compos mentis in my assessment than President Biden is. So I'm going to take that as a little bit of optimism for the future of America.
I don't know that there really is an optimism because I think our dollar is on the verge of tanking. There's probably going to be a run on the dollar at some point at the rate the BRICS nations are moving away from the US dollar.
Oh,
I think by the time of that next administration, there's going to be total chaos because of the dollar issue. And I'm not sure who's going to really be able to deal with it at that point. I know Biden wants to run again. I mean, he's a
yeah.
dinosaur. It's not his age that he's a dinosaur. He's a
No.
dinosaur in foreign policy. He's not
Yeah.
with this multipolar world. It's a different playground. I'm listening to things coming out of the European Union that are just shocking. I mean, they're even taking a very different turn now than the federalists initially had envisioned, which was working through world organizations. Well, now they're the empire and they're beginning to write some rules for the world, such as through the Digital Services Act, now this reciprocity clause. And you have China and now Russia with this whole proxy war. There's a division now in the globe. We don't know where this is going to end up. So I think that Biden is, just because of his foreign policy, is not equipped for this new era for
No,
America.
absolutely not. The de-dollarization, it seems to be rapidly increasing in pace. And of course, as you rightly say, my optimism is that John Kennedy Jr. may be intelligent enough to try and work with the pieces that are left. Pax Americana is something of the past, and this period that America has enjoyed with its hegemony is drawing to a close. This unilateral, was it rules-based world order they call it, but rule for thee but not for me version that we've had, and appears to be coming to the end. So I do worry a little bit about the American people, not just them though. Even back in the UK, I was reading articles today about even one of the banks I bank with now looking like it's going to be in trouble, that it's one of the less profitable ones. And we've seen that with some community banks already in the States. We've seen Janet Yellen effectively saying, we don't care about the small banks. We kind of want them to fail. Put your money where it can be insured in these big banks. I just can't shake this feeling. It's almost an engineered collapse. To what? Well, yeah, that's an entire discussion for another day. But we're also seeing these digital central bank currencies that I've no doubt. And the prank by Vovan and Lexus on Lagarde, the EU Commission, or European Bank, where she openly said that we want to destroy the economy to bring these digital currencies so we can track all payments and basically wipe out cash. And she said that with a straight face. She
I
believed she was
listened to
talking to
Lagarde, though.
Zelensky.
Lagarde said that the digital currency was not meant to replace cash. But here's where it gets
Ah,
even more frightening. I'm just going to tell you where it gets more frightening. They don't have to eliminate cash because the AI now, they
mm.
know, they're going to know when you spend cash. They're going to know what the cash is on. And
Thank you
that's
for
where the
correcting me. But
technology is
do
going.
you recall, was it to a certain sum? They were trying to limit the sum that you could use cash.
I'm not
Uh,
sure, about that?
Yeah, my memory's a bit foggy there. I believe you're correct. It wasn't eliminate cash, but as I think I recall understanding from what she was describing, it was to keep these smaller payments, let's say to between $50 and $100 for like everyday small transactions. But if you wanted to actually transfer or pay for anything more, it wouldn't be possible without using this digital currency. It was along these lines. Very ominous, however. And statements in Russia, I think Dmitry Medvedev touched on this not long ago, were not as ominous, but I could see the potential for the totalitarian tiptoe even in Russia, where he said that any central bank digital currency would be only used to settle foreign trade agreements. I'll have to trust you on that one, because I hope what doesn't happen is, yeah, we see it works on foreign trade agreements. Hey, how about we roll it here and then we use it here? Oh, isn't it so great? They're already, doing the same thing in the West as they've done in the West, like with buses that don't take cash anymore. It's all these electronic cards, and we know that China is almost cashless already. So we can talk about Russia and the West, but I do see certain trends, even in the economy, with rising house prices or property prices in Russia as well, and credit being used. I see some ominous omens as to kind of becoming what you fight almost. And that's why I think Russia really needs to be careful. And I hope they are really keeping that in mind, that they don't just now create a second version with all the same problems that the West is now suffering. Hopefully, with the maintenance of the relationship between the Russian Orthodox Church and the government, I hope that remains, and therefore Russia doesn't descend into the same degeneracy that we're now witnessing in the collective West.
The other thing about the collective West is it's its brand of democracy. And the European Union is non-democratic. I've already looked over the provisions or the recommendations for the next treaty change that'll be coming, and it doesn't really address the democratic deficit. There's too much power in Brussels. The United States is no longer fully democratic. It's disguised. In other words, they say it's democratic, but we can also be put in jail if we violate certain laws or states make certain statements. And talking about the U.S. democracy, how about the Russian journalists not being allowed at the UN?
Yeah, because they're just Russian propagandists. I think Blinken said, or was it John Kirby? Called them just Russian propagandists. Yeah, all this freedom of the press, freedom of
Blinken,
speech.
talk about, I hate to cut you off, but Blinken, he looks like his soul has been removed because he has to toe this propaganda line. And he comes out with about 4 terms in his speeches: Russia aggression, over and over again. So you see the propaganda, Mike, coming from the leaders.
I see Victoria Nuland's hand right up his just moving his mouth for him. There was a great shot where he was at the UN and she was sitting sort of just off behind him, sort of like glowering behind him. I could feel that. I'm sure he could feel it on the back of his neck as well. That gaze, like, go on, Blinken, do as I told you.
Exactly. And you see that Blinken looks like somebody who lost his soul. He's a brilliant man. He went to the finest schools, and now he has to toe this propaganda line that he knows is ridiculous. He doesn't even make any sense. Anybody who really listens to this, if you look at Russia aggression, the US fought more wars during the time of the period that they're stating Russia aggression. I mean, Russia went into what? In all the time Putin has been in power, Georgia and Ukraine, border countries. Matter of fact,
Chechnya was a big one.
I'm going to be in an
for Putin
event
back in the 90s.
There's going to be 3 members of NATO at this event. I'll be out next week in Paris. The Assistant Secretary General. I'm going to ask him the Russia question. I want to know where Russia was really aggressive and why NATO was expanding.
On the topic of Blinken, the book he wrote, I think it was back in the 80s, Ally versus Ally. And if you go back and read it, and then you think of Nord Stream, it was quite eerie that Anthony Blinken was the author of this book. I'm pretty sure it was Ally versus Ally. There was a subtitle as well that escapes my memory right now. China, I believe, made this point as well when Beijing were retorting toward, I think it was at Blinken actually, regarding Chinese aggression towards Taiwan. Beijing were making the point about how many military bases America has around the world and how many countries, and we're seeing it now in Sudan. Let's not kid each other. That's the US that is upset about Sudan concluding this agreement to build a Russian naval base there on the Red Sea. America's not happy. Now we're hearing the same propaganda lines that Sudan has a dictator in power, and this paramilitary force is there to deliver democracy. Just when you start digging in the timeline, you see the visit by Blinken, you see the visit by Newland, then you see the $255 million of humanitarian aid that was pledged to Sudan, which I'm just going to go out on a limb and just say probably didn't go on a humanitarian aid, more than likely grease the palms of the right people to hire the mercenaries required to put this plan into action. I have no evidence, to hand to support that theory, but that's just something I'm going to speculate. Given the same kind of modus operandi that we saw in Ukraine, it's almost too obvious now, especially then with the media spin as well that's then applied to all this. And I really sympathize with the people of Africa who have for many years, hundreds now, at the hands of the UK, US, France, Portugal, Spain, even the Dutch as well, going into this continent and exploiting these poor people. I've interviewed a guy from Somalia who was present at Mogadishu in 1993 when the US intervened there, and the bloodshed. It really does have to come to an end, and I really hope that mankind is not just moving from this unilateral or unipolar to a multipolar world. Not just that, I hope that humanity is evolving and now going up to a higher level where we just stop all this darkness. Really hope we can ascend to a higher level there.
Mike, I'm not that optimistic. I think we're in a race of the empires, and the strongest empire will end up coming out on top. I'm very concerned of what's coming out of the European Union. This mirror and reciprocity clause is frightening. They're writing rules now that other nations have to abide by, or the Western nations have to abide by. It's very concerning. And we're in a new order now. And it's also going to be very interesting to see with Russia and the BRIC nations where that's all going to end up, and with China. It's going to be very interesting. I think we're going to have a different discussion possibly 6 months from now. By the way, Europe is going to have a new commission president, and I'm following that to see who is going to be put in place. I don't believe Ursula will be in next because of just different things that I've read.
I believe Stoltenberg is stepping down as Secretary General of NATO as well. I'm not sure on the time frame on that, but I believe a candidate is being sought for NATO Secretary General as well.
Interesting about Stoltenberg. Do you know that he was anti-NATO? And he actually had a song when he was younger that talked about how NATO needed to be done away with. And there was another Secretary General a while back as well, who was also anti-NATO. So I find it interesting that some of the Europeans that are taking the slot actually were anti-NATO in their history. Like, how does that happen?
Doesn't surprise me in the least. Yeah, doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, that's because Europe is building towards its own army, another area to watch, and will be on Russia's doorstep. Basically, they're in the works of building their own army. And again, I've read some proposals coming out of the political groups of the EU concerning how this needs to completely go forward. It's going forward. They've got this strategic compass, but they're really looking to really bolster it. They're not going to need NATO eventually. NATO just really will bring in the United States. And that's part of some of the discussion that we'll be in Paris, is the future of the EU's defense with some major experts and diplomats.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to hear that and what's discussed.
Well, it's Elnet and it's Israeli, and there tends to be this American bias, and I noticed there's an American bias there. So I think I'm finding that everything depends on your worldview, Mike. And So I noticed there's an American bias and there's some American diplomats. And so I just want to say that. And there's there's French, couple of people from the EU, but not really many from the EU.
Right.
So, but a lot of different diplomats. But I'll fill you in. I'll let you know what
Thank
is
you. I'd
discussed,
appreciate
and
that.
I'm going to ask some very pointed questions. At
Excellent. Look
least
forward
to
to
the
it.
NATO, three members of NATO will be there. So
Fantastic.
anyway, we're running out of time. This was so interesting, and
It is.
definitely,
Thank you.
we didn't touch on quickly on Israel, but Lavrov just stated that nothing was intended. He publicly has now stated that with what was in the media, that there was a tiff between Israel and Russia.
As I've read in a Russian publication, he stated that, of course, all parties were informed beforehand. Not just informed, they all agreed to it. So if I can just get a quick direct quote that I had prepared for you. He stated thus. Yeah, and this ended up with Erdogan then storming out. I tried to get a selection of these publications to really get an idea. There was even a Russian website, I think it's mosyar.ru, where they said Lavrov lied. So this was an Israeli website, but with a
Yes,
Russian
I-24.
extension.
Yes, I-24.
Right, yeah. I saw that. I thought that's interesting that that's permitted. I can access it in Russia, no problem. And it's written in Russian, so clearly for the Russian audience. So I'm going to say that's a little bit of freedom of speech there that I can see going on in Russia. But it said, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the topic of the meeting, discussion of Middle East problems, including the problem of Palestine, was agreed in advance and everyone knew about it. He stressed that the Palestinian issue is the oldest issue that needed to be discussed. This is what was stressed by Lavrov, and that the action was not anti-Israeli, as now is being alleged by many of the media
Yes,
outlets.
because
And
Israel
I
has
can
a
believe Lavrov with the,
Yeah.
when you think about how the agendas are set and all is arranged there. I have no reason to disbelieve Lavrov's version.
Well, also Israel has a pending agreement with the Eurasian Union. So there's a pending trade agreement. I don't know if that's been finalized. And I know that the relations with Israel and Russia are actually good. We're actually stating that Israel should be neutral. We're recommending Israel remain neutral. It's in its best interest to remain neutral because of its relations with Russia. And Putin has given considerable freedom.
I believe Lavrov also went so far as to draw an analogy to Ukraine, whereby saying that Israel is being a bit hypocritical here with its supporting and supplying of the Kiev regime, given its very same arguments in regards to Palestine. So when it talks about territory and threats on borders and things like this, Lavrov was kind of making the point, well, you can't have it both ways. So if you don't support us, then how do you reconcile your own viewpoint and standpoint and arguments in this, which is a very difficult thing.
That's
to
actually a
answer.
really good point.
Yeah, of course, Lavrov goes for the jugular and he doesn't mince his words. He is a very sharp mind, even at 70 years old. It has to be understood here. The guy is seemingly on top of his game and only getting better, like a fine wine.
Oh, yeah, he wanted to be the nuclear physicist. I mean, the man is just absolutely brilliant.
And complemented by Maria Zakharova as well, with a very sharp tongue. And again, someone who really gets straight to the point and draws some excellent analogies using facts. Always just got the facts on hand with, like you say, encyclopedic knowledge of around the world, not just in like specific areas. And they'll pull out statistics, facts, agreements, quotations of certain protocols and draft agreements and all this, and they'll tell you the date that it was ratified and all this.
Yes,
It really is incredible to watch. Yeah.
And it's tragic that he's not listening. I can't believe that journalists aren't even researching his statements to say, well, Lavrov stated this and cited this agreement, and this is what we found. They don't even look. They don't even.
No, they don't. But the important thing is the handshakes he gets. So it was Lavrov and Buran who made this deal in Sudan, and it wasn't just that African country. Lavrov did a whole tour on the Africa-Russia summit, and that's the important thing. And I think that's all really that matters and is cared about here in Russia, is they're making the deals and they're getting these jobs done. and the sentiment is coming more and more over to BRICS plus, not just BRICS anymore, but BRICS plus, as more and more countries seek to join the multilateral world that Lavrov talks about.
And the U.S. has actually missed out on the African Union. China, EU, Russia is there, and our policy is just so reckless at this point. It's about, like you said, wars, setting up.
Yeah, Russia
government.
exercising true diplomacy. China, I would say, going more down the business and financial route with loans and capital. And then we have the collective West, who are just relying on brute force, military, and subversion, and all these dirty, underhanded tactics. And it's apparent for these countries to see they've suffered long enough. And these people, as I understand, they're getting tired of it, and I can completely understand why.
Yes, and you alluded to corruption. Zelensky pocketed, there's a report he pocketed $400 million.
Just from diesel payments.
And
If
we
you think
know
of
the
all the
Biden, the
allocations,
corruption.
yeah, that's just a little taste.
Let's face it, that's why Biden was behind blowing up the Nord Stream. And that wasn't just a Democratic endeavor. You had the Republicans. They did not like the Nord Stream because it was encroaching on U.S. deals and U.S. gas. That's really why they probably said this is the time for us to, attack
and remove the competition.
Remove the competition. And that's a horrific U.S. policy. Anyway, we're really kind of getting to the end. We have a few minutes. Mike, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Now, I do want to make a statement. I do realize that there are certain issues when you brought up before that are not copacetic on the part of China. China has human rights abuses. And I realize that none of these leaders are perfect. But I also think that our foreign policy is so reckless. And we're making so many mistakes. As Putin had said once, actually, we're making so many mistakes. And when you make those kinds of mistakes, you're going to end up losing. And that's where the U.S. is at right now. And I'm hoping to just open the eyes of Americans and also give the Russian side, because I don't believe your side is being heard, and it needs to be heard. And
I'll just add to that, if I may, but the key point Putin made, which I think the West doesn't appreciate or understand. Putin said we've made many mistakes, certainly since the collapse of the Soviet Union, if not before. But he said we are learning from them and we are improving upon them. That's not something I see from the West. I see them make a mistake, they'll stumble, trip, do the same thing over and over again and expect everything to be just fine.
Yes, no, you're right. And they keep making the same mistakes. Anyway, I also know you're on RT now, and they're pulling you in as an expert. So congratulations on
a few
that as
channels,
well.
actually. Thank you very much.
And I'll definitely have you back. Always will have you back as the Russian correspondent. And I'll definitely let you know how that event goes. It's very exciting. It's about 70 different speakers, many high-level diplomats. So I'm looking
thank you to you and
it.
your audience for having me. And I very much look forward to the next time.
Okay, we'll see you then again. And again, congratulations. It's a rite of passage, and it shows that you're a real journalist. But you're right. Now you have to be careful because you are on that list. So I know it's not. But anyway, congratulations. You're a bona fide journalist speaking the truth.
Thank you very much.
Okay, till next time, Mike. Bye-bye.
Bye.